You can be an everyday saint. I am always filled with such admiration for the work that people do, and I suppose at times it makes me feel just a little inadequate. I run across so many inspiring people every day, confident people, driven people, accomplished people from all walks of life, in business and church, at temple, or even at the grocery store. It blows my mind how little I have done in my life, and yet how hard I have tried to live by sincere faith. Life is hard, isn't it? And to live a true life in this material world is very hard indeed, but it is a joy. To live spiritually is a joy. Thinking of my own limitations, it's hard to imagine that God would have any use for me at all. And yet, I think as servants to the divine, or students of spirituality, there is a great sense of glory within us. We want to shake the world because our great mother is always kind of shaking the world, isn't she? We can talk about God's peace, but there is another aspect of experiencing the spirit of life, which is the glory, the fire, the passion. This desire to do great things, courageous things, impossible things, all for the glory of God. Because the spirit of life is not a dead, nihilistic nothingness. It is not some scientific principle or abstract concept to be studied under a microscope, but it is a self. It is alive, far beyond our comprehension of life, as we experience in our limited, imperfect bodies. And so this heart of the universe is full of passion and vigor. It wants to create. It wants to be challenged to grow and overcome. And so as we grow in our spiritual purity, so this sense of glory rises within us. And the Vedanta saint Swami Vivekananda was full of this essential fire, spirit of life, and heroism. Without this passion, serving becomes rather fruitless. But with this passion, serving becomes the whole fruit. These souls are very inspiring, but sometimes their greatness can seem out of reach. In some ways, as spiritual servants, especially when we're first starting out, we can feel very inadequate. What are my gifts in comparison to these incredible servants that have come to ignite the world, who have martyred themselves in the pursuit of justice? Souls who have inspired civilizations, brilliant minds who have written books that define our culture and spiritual life. What good can I do as a little servant or as someone who is just starting out, who is still discovering this desire to serve? I don't know if you have heard of Saint Therese of Lisieux, but I'm a big fan. She is a relatively modern Catholic saint who died at the age of 24 on September 30th, 1897, about 100 years ago. Her nickname is the Little Flower. She lived as a cloistered nun in a Carmelite monastery in France. Therese felt an early call to religious life, and after overcoming various obstacles in 1888, at the early age of 15, she became a nun and joined two of her elder sisters in the cloistered Carmelite community of Lisieux, Normandy. Her life and spiritual wisdom is documented firsthand in her diary, which has become a popular book, The Story of a Soul. Now, Therese did not live a long life, and she wasn't given a chance to do great things as we might consider them. Yet her spiritual wisdom was very great. In her famous book, Story of a Soul, she speaks of the little way of charity. Now, we are all familiar with the word charity. And if you're like me, then when you think of the word charity, you immediately think of donating money to a church or an organization. But charity is not only giving material things away. It is an attitude and an approach to life that is grounded in service. It is sanctifying the little things that we do by turning everything that we do every small, everyday, mundane, simple thing into an act of love. Living by charity is living in service to others, and perhaps most importantly, being charitable to ourselves as well. And this is a spiritual path to enlightenment, salvation, or union with God. I think in today's world of grandiose thinking, superhero movies, and this burden of immense expectation placed upon us by society, this message from God's little flower is more important than ever. You don't need to engage in battle or save the world with superpowers to live a meaningful life. In fact, you can be a small, everyday saint. And this is a very good way to live and a very blessed path to follow to practice this little way. I consider Saint Therese to be my patron saint and a great inspiration in my life, and I hope her little way can inspire you too. The little way can be compared to karma yoga in Hinduism, or the concept of merit in Buddhism. Service is not just about doing good work, after all. That would be far too externalized. It is about softening our heart towards ourselves and others through the practice of compassion and humility. Here is Saint Therese of Lisieux's perspective, how charity can help us find self-acceptance for our own imperfections while doing spiritual work and serving others as well. O Mother, since I have been sick, the care that you have lavished on me has taught me so much more about charity. No remedy seems too costly to you, and if it doesn't work then, without becoming weary, you try something else. Thinking about these things, I've told myself that I ought to be as compassionate towards the spiritual infirmities of my sisters as you are, dear Mother, in caring for me with so much love. I have noticed, and it's quite natural, that the holiest sisters are the most loved. People seek out their conversation, and they render services to them without their asking for them. In short, these souls who are capable of enduring the lack of consideration and tact find themselves surrounded with the affection of everyone. One can apply to them this word from our Father St. John of the Cross: "All good things were given to me when I no longer sought them out of self-love." Imperfect souls, on the other hand, are not sought out. No doubt people remain on their behalf within the boundaries of religious politeness, but perhaps out of fear of saying some not so nice words to them, people avoid their company. By saying imperfect souls, I don't mean to speak only about spiritual imperfections, since the holiest of persons will only be perfect in heaven. I mean to speak about the lack of judgment, of manners, of susceptibility in certain characters, all the things that don't make life very pleasant. I know well that these moral infirmities are chronic. There's no hope of a cure. But I also know full well that my mother would not stop caring for me or trying to comfort me, even if I were to remain ill for my whole life. So here's the conclusion that I make from this. I must seek out, during recreational periods, during free time, the company of the sisters who are the least pleasant to me, and fulfill among those blessed souls the role of the Good Samaritan. One word, one pleasant smile are often enough to cause a sad soul to brighten up. But it's not absolutely to attain that goal that I want to practice charity, because I know that soon I would be discouraged. A word that I might have said with the best of intentions might perhaps be interpreted all wrong. Therefore, so as not to waste my time, I want to be pleasant with everyone, and particularly with the least pleasant sisters, in order to give joy, and to respond to the counsel that God gave in the gospel, more or less in these terms. When you give a feast, don't invite your family members and your friends out of fear that they won't invite you in turn, and thus you will have received your reward. But invite the poor, the lame, the crippled, And you will be happy that they won't be able to pay you back, because your Father who sees in secret will reward you. The practice of charity hasn't always seemed so sweet to me, as I was telling you just now, dear mother. To prove this to you, I'm going to tell you about certain little battles that will certainly make you smile. For a long time at evening prayers, I was placed in front of a sister who had a funny idiosyncrasy, and I think maybe a lot of inner illumination because she rarely used a book. Here's how I noticed it. As soon as this sister had arrived, she would begin making a strange little noise that sounded like one that would be made if you rubbed two shells against each other. I was the only one who noticed it because I have extremely keen hearing, a little too keen sometimes. To tell you, Mother, how much that little noise tired me out would be impossible. I really wanted to turn my head and look at the guilty one, who, of course, didn't notice her tick. That was the only way to let her know what was going on. But in the depths of my heart, I felt that it was better to suffer, that for the love of God, and not to give the sister any trouble. So I kept quiet and tried to unite myself with God and to forget the little noise. And it was of no use to me. I felt sweat pouring out of me, and I was obliged to simply pray a prayer of suffering. But as I was suffering, I was seeking the way to undergo it, not with agitation, but with joy and peace, at least in the innermost part of my soul. So I made every effort to love that little noise that was so unpleasant. Instead of trying not to hear it, which would be impossible, I placed all my attention on hearing it very well, as if it had been a delightful concert, and my whole prayer, which was not the prayer of quietude, was spent in offering that tiny concert to Jesus. Isn't that cute? Hearing Therese struggle to have patience for her sisters and perfect her spirit through selflessness, even in the smallest everyday way, is admirable. This is how we give away the ego and become less of ourselves, while God's Spirit grows in us day by day. Little Therese contented herself in this humble path of self-restraint and charity, and this is the true heart of karma yoga. Yet due to the grandiose thinking of our culture and modern times, we forget that spiritual glory is found in the simplest things. It is found in a word of compassion to a friend. It is found in remembering someone's birthday, in having grace for a very stressful person or situation, and being kind to those who show bitterness towards us. Having a moment of gratitude or singing a song with God in our hearts, the little way is pursuing God's glory in the simple everyday things that we do for each other, and small internal acts of gentling our spirit and showing self-restraint. Not everyone needs to shake the world. And in truth, it is more important that we do these small, everyday things than one big, exciting thing that will soon be forgotten. Our spiritual lives are really a long, slow, unacknowledged culmination of small acts of kindness as we learn to walk with God with pure intention. But God sees, and God acknowledges. So we should be careful of our spiritual fervor. These feelings of urgency and grandiosity are often manipulated, and a good heart can be deceived and misled down a path that is ultimately self-deluded and self-serving. This is why having a healthy sense of humility is so very important to spiritual practice, especially towards the attainment of knowledge and discernment. Ground yourself in small, humble, everyday acts of service. Be content with the work that God has placed before you. This is the little way. One of the richest and most rewarding ways of expressing God's glory is giving hope and encouragement to one another. We think these small efforts mean less than big, exciting crusades because it is this materialistic, externalized world where these small acts of big grace are really not recognized. They hold no monetary value. They aren't part of some big movement that people can profit from financially, and so they are dismissed. But God dwells in your heart, and God does everything with you and knows the truest intention hidden away in the deepest chambers of yourself. Truly, it is by our intention that we are known, and it is by our purest intention that we come to know God. So this is why it is so important not to be a hypocrite. Consider, one sincere act of grace has more spiritual weight and holds more value in this hidden spiritual kingdom than a self-serving crusade in the name of righteousness. All the small ways that we follow His will and the little things that we do to encourage, inspire, and serve others culminate in a vast interconnected tapestry of self-awareness and heavenly glory. If enough people can live this way, then bit by bit, society becomes brighter, gentler, kinder, and we can bring about world peace. So don't fear if you don't feel called to be a warrior for righteousness and you don't want to fight the world. You can be an inspirer and a confidant, someone who gives hope and encouragement to your friends and family, someone who guides in a little way. No act of kindness is ever wasted. We all have a place in the tree of life, and by serving God in these little everyday moments, we are being of far greater service to the world than someone who blows on a horn and yet is empty in their principles. We can manifest God's glory before the eyes of our dearest friends, before the eyes of our closest family, before the eyes of our group or our congregation. And this is the best way to begin to serve. This is the path of the peacemaker. Those who serve God in this way carry the world. And as Christ says, those who would be first among you must come last. I am not saying have no ambition for God. I think spiritually we must have great ambition for us to succeed in our goal of union or salvation or liberation or enlightenment. This road is very hard, and what life demands of us is not easy. Sometimes it can feel like the world has become nothing but obstacles between us and our faith or our principles. And this is by design, that the more we come to value sacred things, the less we desire to really be part of the material world. The steeper the path grows until we reach that plateau at which all work is finished and we can serve in the highest way. To commit ourselves to such a daunting path, to remain true to our virtues and our principles and embrace a way of life that is righteous and pure and true, we must have great ambition for God. That alone is reason enough for our feelings of glory. But channel such ambition and glory into those small, everyday tasks and humility. If you wish to serve God in a bigger way, if that fire is burning up your bones, then do the small things first. Treat others the way you want to be treated. Commit yourself to a daily sadhana, worship, or practice. Renounce more and more things in your life that detract from your calling. Show your commitment through your actions. Cultivate patience. Practice the little way. Waiting is an art, and there is a great lesson in having to wait. Waiting teaches us to relinquish our desires and detach from our expectations. It teaches us to have obedience to higher will, to understand that our service is to the world, not to ourselves. It is such a gentle way to teach, and such a profound teaching, to be made to wait to receive God's will and God's grace. The act of waiting teaches everything there is to know about spiritual service. We must become comfortable with the pace set for us in our life. We must desire very little for ourselves to have this contentment. And in truth, all of the great spiritual teachers had to wait. Jesus had to wait. Muhammad had to wait. Buddha and Krishna, they both had to wait. They all lived full lives before they came to the altar and manifested the higher will. And this is because waiting is a spiritual art. It shows us with time the true metal of who we are, the true spirit of sublimation. Even if we must wait 1,000 lifetimes, if it is God's will, then let His will be done. As humble servants, although we are full of hope for what might come, we cannot place our expectations in the future, but only content ourselves with daily practice, worship, and sublimation to the higher will. We can only serve in the capacity that we have been called to serve, without desire for ourselves. And if we have great ambition, it can only be to the fulfillment of the higher will in our lives. This is the little way. It is far more important to have peace with God and die in a state of peace and contentment with our life of service than to be full of zealous fire that is unquenchable and full of delusion. It is the cultivation of inner peace and outer harmony that is the true pinnacle of spiritual practice. This is what we should all seek to attain first. Once this inner oasis in the heart has been gained, and this unshakable peace dwells within, only then can we truly focus our minds and commit to this work. So, someone out there is wondering, what is God's purpose for me? What is God's plan? And God's purpose is always towards unity and the attainment of that deep oasis of indwelling peace that lives in our heart of hearts. This peace is the spiritual kingdom of heaven and the garden of truth. It is the tree of life, the nirvana, the attaining of the Tao, the liberation, and the seventh chamber of the interior castle. God dwells within you, and once found, this great spirit creates harmony in your life. The goal of our spiritual practice is always towards the attainment of this union by purifying the heart, that we might know God's peace and receive His presence. This is always God's purpose for us, and only God can know the full spectrum, the depth and width of our heart, who we are, and where we are at in our spiritual growth. So we must trust God's timing and where God has kept us in our lives, that we are learning and growing in the right time. If God wills it, and if God desires it, then this magnanimous mother or father will bring us to that place where full union and divine understanding is granted. Our desire should be to serve for the sake of service and not for reward. To do good for the sake of good, for goodness itself is the reward. As divine servants, it is not our place to anticipate or question. It is only our place to listen and to follow the higher will. The fruit of our labors belong to the One. He gifts us with the desire, the knowledge, and the skills to fulfill the work, and we gift Him with the fruit. That is the balance of spiritual life. So do not be disheartened by the small, everyday acts of charity, sanctity, and holiness that you do. God dwells within us and does everything with us, so every good act is counted. It is by following the little way that we manifest God's greatness within us, and that is the life of the small, everyday saint.